Hello, students. Let's read section 1 of The Scarlet Ibis by James Hurst. It was in the clove of seasons. Summer was dead, but autumn had not yet been born, that the ibis lit in the bleeding tree. The flower garden was strained with rotting brown magnolia petals, and ironweeds grew rank amid the purple phlox. The 5 o'clocks by the chimney still marked time, but the oriole nest in the elm was untenanted and rocked back and forth like an empty cradle. The last graveyard flowers were blooming, and their smell drifted across the cotton field and through every room of our house, speaking softly the names of our dead. It's strange that all this is still so clear to me, now that summer has long since fled and time has had its way. A grindstone stands where the bleeding tree stood, just outside the kitchen door, and now if an oriole sings in the elm, its song seems to die up in the leaves, a silvery dust. The flower garden is prim, the house a gleaming white, and the pale fence across the yard stands straight and spruce. But sometimes, like right now, as I sit in the cool, dream draped parlor, the grindstone begins to turn, and time, with all its changes, is ground away, and I remember Doodle. Doodle was just about the craziest brother a boy ever had. Of course, he wasn't crazy crazy like old Miss Leedy, who was in love with President Wilson and wrote him a letter every day, but a nice crazy, like someone you meet in your dreams. He was born when I was 6 and was, from the outset, a disappointment. He seemed all head, with a tiny body which was red and shriveled like an old man's. Everybody thought he was going to die. Everybody except Aunt Nicey, who had delivered him. She said he would live because he was born in a caul, and cauls were made from Jesus' nightgown. Daddy had Mr. Heath, the carpenter, build a little mahogany coffin for him. But he didn't die, and when he was 3 years old, Mama and Daddy decided they might as well name him. They named him William Armstrong, which is like tying a big tail on a small kite. Such a name sounds good only on a tombstone. I thought myself pretty smart at many things, like holding my breath, running, jumping, or climbing the vines in Old Woman Swamp, and I wanted more than anything else to race to Horsehead Landing, someone to box with, and someone to perch with in the top fork of the great pine behind the barn, where across the fields and swamps you could see the sea. I wanted a brother. But Mamma, crying, told me that even if William Armstrong lived, he would never do these things with me. He might not, she sobbed, even be all there. He might, as long as he lived, lie on the rubber sheet in the center of the bed in the front bedroom where the white marsacat curtains billowed out in the afternoon sea breeze, rustling like palmetto fronds. It was bad enough having an invalid brother, but having one who was possibly not all there was unbearable. So I began to make plans to kill him by smothering him with a pillow. However, one afternoon as I watched him, my head poked between the iron posts of the foot of the bed, he looked straight at me and grinned. I skipped through the rooms, down the echoing halls, shouting, Mama, he smiled. He's all there. He's all there. And he was. When he was 2, if you laid him on his stomach, he began to move himself, straining terribly. The doctor said that with his weak heart, this strain would probably kill him. But it didn't. Trembling, he pushed himself up, turning first red, then a soft purple, and finally collapsing back onto the bed like an old, worn out doll. I can still see Mamma watching him, her hand pressed tight across her mouth, her eyes wide and unblinking. But he learned to crawl. It was his 3rd winter, and we brought him out of the front bedroom, putting him on the rug before the fireplace. For the first time, he became one of us. As long as he lay all the time in bed, we called him William Armstrong, even though it was formal and sounded as if we were referring to one of our ancestors. But with his creeping around on the deerskin rug and beginning to talk, something had to be done about his name. It was I who renamed him. When he crawled backwards, and if he were in reverse and couldn't change gears, if you called him, he'd turn around as if he were going in the other direction. Then he'd be right back up to you to be picked up. Crawling backward made him look like a doodle bug, so I began to call him Doodle, and in time even Mamma and Daddy thought it was a better name than William Armstrong. Only Aunt Nicey disagreed. She said call babies should be treated with special respect, since they might turn out to be saints. Renaming my brother was perhaps the kindest thing I ever did for him, because nobody expects much from someone called Doodle. Although Doodle learned to crawl, he showed no signs of walking, but he wasn't idle. He talked so much that we all quit listening to what he said. It was about this time that Daddy built him a go kart, and I had to pull him around. At first, I just paraded him up and down the piazza, but then he started crying to be taken out into the yard, and it ended up by my having to lug him wherever I went. If I so much as picked up my cap, he'd start crying to go with me, and Mama would call from wherever she was, "Take Doodle with you." He was a burden in many ways. The doctor had said that he mustn't get too excited, too hot, too cold, or too tired, and that he must always be treated gently. A long list of don'ts went with him, all of which I ignored once we got out of the house. To discourage his coming with me, I'd run with him across the ends of the cotton rows and careen him around corners on two wheels. Sometimes I accidentally turned him over, but he never told Mama. His skin was very sensitive and he had to wear a big straw hat wherever he went out. When the going got rough and he had to cling to the sides of the go kart, the hat slipped all the way down over his ears. He was a sight. Finally, I could see I was licked. Doodle was my brother and he was going to cling to me forever, no matter what I did. So I dragged him across the burning cotton field to share with him the only beauty I knew, Old Woman Swamp. I pulled the I pulled the go-kart through the sawtooth fern, down into the green dimness where the palmetto fronds whispered by the stream. I lifted him out and set him down in the soft rubber grass beside a tall pine. His eyes were round with wonder as he gazed about him, and his little eyes began to stroke the rubber grass. Then he began to cry. "For heaven's sakes, what's the matter?" I asked, annoyed. "It's so pretty," he said. "So pretty, pretty, pretty." After that day, Doodle and I often went down into Old Woman's Swamp. I would gather wildflowers, wild violets, honeysuckle, yellow jasmine, snake flowers, and water lilies, and with wire grass we'd weave them into necklaces and crowns. We bedeck ourselves with our handiwork and loll about thus beautified beyond the touch of the everyday world. Then, when the slanted rays of the sun burned orange in the top of the pines, we'd drop our jewels into the stream and watch them float away toward the sea. There is within me, and with sadness I have watched it in others, a knot of cruelty born by the stream of love, much as our blood sometimes bears the seed of destruction. And at times I was mean to Doodle. One day I took him up to the barn loft and showed him his casket, telling him how we all had believed he would die. It was covered with a film of Paris green sprinkled to kill the rats, and screech owls had built a nest inside it. Doodle studied the mahogany box for a long time and then said, "It's not mine." "It is," I said. "And before I'll help you down from the loft, you're going to have to touch it." "I won't touch it," he said sullenly. "Then I'll leave you here by yourself," I threatened, and made as if I were going down. Doodle was frightened of being left. "Don't leave me, brother," he cried, and leaned toward the coffin. His hand, trembling, reached out, and when he touched the casket, he screamed. A screech owl flapped out of the box and into our faces, scaring us and covering us with Paris green. Doodle was paralyzed, so I put him on my shoulder and carried him down the ladder. And even when we were outside in the bright sunshine, he clung to me, crying, "Don't leave me, don't leave me." And that's the end of section 1. Hope you enjoyed the story so far. Thanks for following along.